Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. I'm Maria Musavi and I am Vice President of Event at ISC International Student Caucus at the University of Toronto. Today we are having our immigration session with Elizabeth Long, and you have been waiting for this session for a long time. And she's an immigration lawyer from Mingle G, a legal firm. And today she will cover a lot of your questions. The topics that we are going to talk about are study permit, work permit, and PR applications. After this session, we may have time for a short Q&A session, about like 15 minutes, that you can ask your general questions. I have received a lot of your questions and I have given them to Elizabeth, and hopefully you can get all your answers during the presentation. We also have Zia from Mingle G law firm, and she will be answering some of your questions and she will be helping us having this session. So without further ado, thank you, Elizabeth, for being here and for answering our questions. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great to be here and speak with you guys. Although I can't see you face to face, it's nice that we at least have this virtual option today. So let me just start the presentation. Now, I do want to add a caveat today in that what I tell you today is true today, but laws are changing all of the time, especially during COVID times. And so we will be putting a link afterwards so that if you wanted to sign up for our newsletters to get updates on immigration law, you can, okay? Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, first, we're going to talk about your student status, how to make sure that you keep your student status. There's a lot of new rules, especially around COVID times, about how to keep your study permit status. And so we'll talk about that. We're going to move on to talk about the post-grad work permits and how to make sure that you remain qualified for the post-grad work permit. And then finally, we're going to move on to strategies as to how to qualify and get your permanent residence. So before we talk about permanent residence, I wanted to talk a little bit about some very important concepts that you need to understand while you have temporary status. The first one is implied status. This is one of the most important concepts that you will need to know if you have a temporary status, if you have a study permit, work permit, or you're on visitor status. Essentially, when you have temporary status, your status will end. It will state on your study permit, for example, that it's only valid to a certain date. What implied status is that if you file the application to extend your status in Canada before your status ends. Now the website says 30 days, but that's a recommendation. The law is as long as you file the application, even the day before, even the day of, okay? As long as you filed it properly, you can continue on with that status until a decision is made. That can be very, very important, especially during COVID times where you may not be able to get your biometrics yet, and so it would take a long time for a decision to be made, is made. So, but as long as you filed your application before your status ends, you can continue on with your status. That's called implied status, okay? Now, if you do not file it in time, if you do not file it, let's say my study permit ends on June 30th, and I forget all about it, and I file it on, and I look at my study permit on July 1st, Canada Day, okay? And say, oh, happy Canada Day. And then look at, oh, shoot, I don't have status in this country anymore. Okay, what can I do at that point in time? Well, the law allows you to file what's called a restoration of status within Canada. You don't have to leave. You can stay in Canada and wait for the decision on your restoration of status within 90 days of you losing status, okay? However, the difference between filing it after you lose your status and filing before your status ends is that you don't have status while you're waiting for the restoration of status. So if it takes, 2 months, 3 months to get a decision on my study permit, I can't work or study during that time while I'm waiting for the decision to be made if I did not file my extension before my status ends. If I filed it on June 30th, okay, I can continue on studying and working during the summer, right? Because I have continued on my status. If I filed it the day after, I cannot because my status had ended on June 30th. I filed it on July 1st. I have to file $200 more to make my restoration of status, but I cannot work or study, okay? So that is a very, very important thing. First thing you need to do, look at your study permits and make sure that that date is circled 3 times. You give yourself 3 reminders. Make sure you file something before, okay? You also have to file properly. What it means by filing properly is that you have to have at least 3 things filed, okay, to make it proper. You have to make sure that you've submitted the right forms. You have to make sure that you've submitted the right fees. And then you have to make sure that it was submitted. So if you are going online and you have pressed the submit button, okay, you have to make sure that you get a confirmation email back. You are looking at your website and it says submitted. If you don't press that button properly, or you don't pay the right fees, or you don't submit the right forms, then it's as if you did not apply at all. Don't worry though about things like biometrics, other things, other documents that you weren't able to get yet, like school documents. Those things can be updated afterwards. So let's say the biometric centers aren't open. Don't worry. The government understands that. As long as you've pressed the submit button, you are okay. You get implied status. And then if you can take some time to wait until the centers open in Canada to get your biometrics. Okay, so make sure you have the 3 things you need to file properly. Right forms, the right fees, and press the button. Okay. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is making sure that you're working in a high-skilled position. So in Canada right now, the immigration department and the government really makes a big deal out of what occupation you work in. They've grouped all of the occupations into 5 different groups. NOC O, A, and B are high-skilled, and NOC C and D are low-skilled. So what's high-skilled and what's low-skilled? Okay, let's play a game. I'm gonna say a occupation, and let's see if you can guess whether or not it's high-skilled or low-skilled. Let's take an office situation. A receptionist, that's low-skilled. A secretary, that's high-skilled. A data entry clerk, that's low-skilled. An accounting clerk, that's low-skilled. A bookkeeper, that's high-skilled. A medical assistant, that's high-skilled. A dental assistant, that's low-skilled. Okay, so as you can probably see, oftentimes it's not very, very clear as to whether or not the occupation that you are going to do or that you have done is high-skilled or low-skilled. But it's very important for your immigration future that the work that you do, you understand whether or not it's high skilled or low skilled, and how that's going to contribute towards your ability to get permanent residence in the end. Okay. All right, let's now move on to talking about your status on a study permit and what you can and cannot do. So first of all, the Act says that you will lose your status within 90 days. Irregardless of when your study permit expires, you will lose your status within 90 days if you stop studying. Okay? There are two exceptions to the rule. There are scheduled breaks, okay? And those are, for example, summer breaks, right? That are on the school calendar. There are also authorized leaves. So authorized leaves are where you get special permission from the school, and the school has to be willing to say that they are giving you authorized leave, okay? For example, if someone was pregnant and they needed to take leave from their studies, they can ask the school to give them up to 150 days of authorized leave. Past the 150 days, they would have to apply for a visitor extension if they're not able to go back to school, okay? But you cannot work on an authorized leave. You can't say, oh, I need money, so I'm not gonna go to school. Well, you can't work during that time that you're on authorized leave as well, okay? But at least you don't lose your status. Now, the government has also announced that if your classes were canceled because of COVID, that would still be okay. Here's the thing about a lot of these COVID policies. They have not been extremely clear as to the details of whether or not how some situations are okay and some situations are not. So that still remains to be seen. But if your classes, for example, are canceled and you're still a student, right? It seems that they are going to give you some leeway to continue on with your student status if you then go and take your classes the following semester. You have to maintain your status, okay? So if your study permit expires, you can't say, oh, because of COVID, I can't apply, take pity on me, no, there is no such thing as that, okay? You can file your online applications. Just because you can't do your medicals or you can't do your biometrics or you can't do this and that, it does not mean that you can't file the application. Remember what I said. To file your application properly, you fill out the forms, you pay the fees, and you press the button. If you need some time to collect documents so that you will qualify for another study permit or for your work permit, etc., you can do so, but make sure that you don't pass the deadlines, okay? You submit it. If your study permit is going to expire, you submit it before. And then afterwards, you can update your application. You can tell the officer, look, I don't have these documents now. My school is closed because of COVID. I will be sending you the documents. So you can update your application afterwards by sending them through the web form, okay? But make sure you file your application in time. Now, let's talk a little bit about working while you are studying. You can only work normally while you are a full-time student, except in the last semester. IRCC has made an announcement that if your classes were canceled, okay, not by choice, if you only choose to do, 2 classes, that's by choice. But if you were registered for 5 classes, but your classes were canceled, okay, then you could still work as well, okay. You can, now here's the thing, if you have completed your studies, you are no longer a student. This is a very, very common misconception by students that, oh, I've completed my study, I finished my program, I haven't applied for my work permit yet, but my study permit is still valid. So that's a scheduled break, so I can work, right? No, you cannot work. If you have received the first indication that you have received, whether it's your transcripts or whether it's your, your school has notified you online, or you have received a letter from the school, whatever comes first, that you have completed your studies, on that day, you can no longer work by virtue of you being a student. Okay, if you've applied for your post-grad work permit, and we'll talk about that in detail, then you can work from that time. But until you actually do, you can't just work if you finish your program based on your student status. Unless if you finished one program and you're going to do another program and you've been accepted to the second program, and that second program will begin within 150 days of your first program. In that case, they are allowing you to work in between those two programs if it's less than 150 days. If your classes are canceled because of COVID, you can work part-time, okay? And if you are going to work in what is called essential services as defined by the government, then you can work full-time during COVID times. And I'll have to double check, but that is a limited period of time as to when you can work full-time as a full-time student. It's not forever, okay? All right, let's talk about the post-grad. So before you even apply, okay, you have to think to yourself, should I apply? You only get one golden ticket in your life. Why is the post-grad work permit golden ticket? It's because it is an easy work permit to get. You graduate and you can get it, okay? You can work anywhere you like. It's an open work permit, and most work permits in Canada, almost all work permits are employer specific, okay? So this one is an open work permit. You can work anywhere you like, but it's only one that you get in your lifetime. And the length of the postgrad work permit will coincide with your program, right? So if you have a one-year program, you get a one-year program. If you get a 2-year program or more, then you have a 3-year work permit, right? So if, and you know, sometimes if you have, for example, you're doing a master's and your actual period of studies is 16 months, but it's actually equal to 2 academic years, you can also get a 3-year work permit, okay? But so the length of the work permit can be very important if you want to remain in Canada and get your PR. Oftentimes, what happens when someone just applies for a 1-year work permit based on a 1-year program is that by the end of the 1-year time, you may not have had enough time to finish 1 year of work experience in Canada that you'll need for PR, for example, or find that job offer that you'll need for PR. And then you can't apply for another work permit, because to qualify for other work permits, it can be quite difficult, right? Oftentimes, the employer will need to get an LMIA. In order to get LMIA, the employer will have to show that they can't find a Canadian to do the job. And many employers, won't be willing to do that because they say, I can find another Canadian. And 2, even if they are willing to do that, the government might not believe that they can't find another Canadian, and they'll reject the LMIA. So one of the most important things when we do planning is to see how possible is it for you to get your permanent residence while you are on your postgrad work permit. So if you've only done a 1-year program and you think, oh, I may not be able to get my PR by the end of the 1-year work permit, you could do another 1-year program and add those together before applying for the postgrad, and then you can get a 3-year work permit afterwards if you do 2 1-year programs that qualify. So here's the thing about the postgrad. It is becoming more and more difficult to qualify. It shouldn't be that difficult to qualify, but they are putting in more and more rules about the postgrad. First of all, they are requiring you to have maintained full-time status in school during every semester of your program, unless it's the final semester, okay? Now, or if you have authorized leave. Now, oftentimes, if you haven't, if you had to have some classes canceled because of COVID, that could be a reason for them to allow you an exception to the rule, okay? But if you have a choice, do not go part-time during your studies. If you, for example, say, oh, I'm having a lot of difficulty during the semester, I'm having, I'm sick or whatever, it might be better if you ask the school to give you an authorized leave and just take the entire semester off rather than do part-time. Because if you did, authorized leave is okay. Okay, it's stated that it's okay to have authorized leave. But if you did a part-time and then you said, oh, because I was sick, etc., the officer may or may not issue you the work permit at the end. Okay. Now, distance education, if it is over 50% of your program, it normally disqualifies you from getting a postgrad work permit. Now, the immigration has said that students who are in Canada and have to take online courses due to COVID, that you should be okay. Okay, they have been waffling back and forth on this. For now, this is what they have stated on their website. If you're outside of Canada, that's another story. Okay, if you don't have to do online, don't do online. If you have to do online because of COVID, then you do what you need to do. I would still go to class, right? Because otherwise you would lose your status. Here's the thing about your work, okay? The website says, in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit, you have to apply within 180 days. But if you finished your studies and you applied on 179 days, and you did nothing else, and you just applied on 179 days, your application would likely be rejected. Why? It's because you would not have status on that day. Remember, you lose your status within 90 days of you stopping to study. You also lose your status if your study permit is no longer valid. Okay, so I would like to give you this rule for when you should apply for your postgrad work permit. You should apply for your postgrad work permit within 90 days of you finishing your program. The first indication that you finished your program, that is the date that you start counting. You have to apply within 90 days of that date, and also when your study permit is still valid. If your study permit expires before the 90 days, then the deadline is when your study permit expires, okay? So whichever comes first, your study permit is valid, the validity date of your study permit, or within 90 days, okay? If you do so and you apply within that period, then you can work full-time while waiting for your work permit. This is super important because right now, if you apply for your work permit, but you haven't done your biometrics yet, your application is going to be on hold, okay? You will have to do your biometrics when the biometric center is open, and then you can get your work permit. So a lot of times you may be on, your application may be on hold for months. Who knows when the biometric centers are going to be open in Canada, okay? But if you apply within that period, then you can get your, you can start working. You don't have to wait for your new work permit. You can start working, okay? I've had a question where somebody asked, what if my study permit is going to expire before I get my grades, before I finish my last classes or I do my exams? You must apply for your study permit, okay? This rule that you can work full-time only works if you have a study permit, if you hold a valid study permit. If your study permit is not valid, then you don't hold a valid study permit. Apply for it early before, okay, and try to get your study permit as soon as possible, okay? The officer is supposed to give you your study permit valid for 90 days after you complete your program to allow you some time, okay? Go and apply to extend your study permit right away if you know that your study permit will expire before you finish your classes. During the COVID times as well, you're not allowed to do what we call flag polling, going to the border and then doing a turn around, you turn around the flag and come back and get your work permit. This is what a lot of students have been doing before. And you can get your work permit right there and then, okay? But don't always listen to your friends and see, oh, what did you do? What did you do? No, always know what the law is that applies to you. During COVID times, you cannot do flag polling. So you're gonna have to plan, okay? Make a plan on how to be able to work, apply for your postgrad online, apply for it properly within the right period of time, make sure your study permit is still valid when you apply, and then you can start working. All right. Now let's talk about permanent residence. And the first one I want to talk to you guys about is express entry because it is the most popular, okay? I'm going to touch on a few other categories after express entry as well. But most of you should be maybe familiar with this program. How express entry works is that you have to create an online profile. You can create an online profile if you qualify for permanent residence based on 3 different categories: the skilled worker class, Canadian experience class, or skilled trades. Once you've created a profile, you can enter into the pool, but the trick is not just to enter into the pool. Once you've entered into the pool, you haven't yet applied for your permanent residence. You will get a series of points based on your background called the CRS points. And it's going to be based on your background and whether or not you have provincial nomination. And once you have that, then every 2 weeks or so, the government will announce a number. They'll have a draw where they announce a number. And if your number is above that number, then you can apply. If it's not, then you stay in the pool. It used to be that when they announced that number, they just allow for almost all the draws, they would say anybody in the pool who has a CRS score of above a certain number, then you can apply. But during COVID times, they have been very specific. So during COVID times, they have only invited those who qualify under Canadian experience class or under provincial nominee programs, not under the skilled worker class, okay? So essentially, if you qualify, if your number is above that number for the draw and you are in the category that they are drawing, then you will receive what's called an invitation to apply, ITA, and that's the holy grail. Once you've received this invitation to apply, then you can actually submit your application. So let's talk a little bit about these express entry programs and how to enter into the pool. Many of you will already qualify if you have work experience outside of Canada or while you are studying, okay? Because under the first category, under the federal skilled worker class, you don't necessarily need to even step foot into Canada in order to qualify. In order to qualify under this category, you must have had a work experience of at least 1 year, full-time, high-skilled, continuous in one occupation. Let's break that down. 1 year of high-skilled, we talked about high-skilled, not O, A, and B. Continuous, there is no break in between, okay? So you can't do co-op, 4 months here, go back to school for 4 months and go back to co-op, okay? It has to be continuous. Full-time means at least 30 hours a week. If you were doing part-time work, like 15 hours a week, but you did it continuously for 2 years, you can add those hours together, okay? But don't be smart and say, oh, well, I work 60 hours, I only need 6 months. No, you need at least 1 year. 1 year and 1,560 hours, which is 52 times 30, okay? And then, so you need high-skilled, full-time, continuous in one occupation. So if I was a nurse and I worked for 6 months in one hospital, and then I transferred to another hospital, I worked another 6 months there, that is continuous, and it's in one occupation, so that's okay. But if I was a nurse and worked in one hospital, and then I worked in the same hospital and I became a doctor for another 6 months. So 6 months as a nurse, 6 months as a doctor, is that okay? No, it's not, because it's not in the same occupation, okay? So once you have that work experience, you do have to pass the language exam of at least 6.0 in each category, each skill level. Most of you should have no problem doing that. They'll take a look at the background for you. And most of you, if you have the work experience, you should probably qualify already, okay? And that work experience, like I said, does not have to be in Canada. It can be overseas. It can be while you're studying. We do a lot of grad students who have TARA work experience, okay? That will qualify as long as it's continuous. And you need to have financial savings for this, okay? The second class is the Canadian Experience class. This is the one that during COVID times, during the last 3 months, the government has been inviting. They haven't been inviting the first one. They have been inviting the second one, okay? And the work experience for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year of high-skilled, full-time work experience in Canada while you are not a full-time student, and it has to be employed work, not self-employed work, okay? It has to be legal work. So let's break that down. 1 year in 3 years, okay? So it does not have to be continuous, and it does not have to be in one occupation. It could be 2 different occupations. You could combine 2 different kinds of part-time work experience, etc. Okay, but it does have to meet the 1,560 hours, 30 hours per week on average, 1 year, and it has to be when you are not a full-time student. So you can get that when you graduate, or if you have a spouse and they have a work permit, they can just, the time that they're working on they're not going to school, so that work experience will count for that. It has to be high-skilled. And it has to be, you have to be employed. So if you are in Canada and you are employed, you should receive a T4 at the very end, okay? Usually in February, you get a T4, you file your taxes, okay? Your payroll should have deductions, CPP, EI deducted from it, okay? And income tax deducted from it. That's what being employed is. If you are self-employed and let's say you own a significant amount of the company and you are directing yourself, you can't just start a company and employ yourself. That's still considered self-employment work, okay? And then after the work experience is the most important. There is also language requirements, but you should have no issues passing the language requirement here. Language becomes far more important when we talk about how to get your CRS points to get out of the pool. There's also skilled trades as well, and this is for people who are in the construction industry or cooks and chefs. Okay, so let's say you have now gotten into the pool. Okay, I have 4 people here who have gotten into the pool, and their scores, are here. So if the draw was last time, it was 437, I think. 437. Who's going to get an invitation to apply? Well, Trupti, maybe. Okay. If Trupti qualifies under the Canadian Experience class, yes, she would get an invitation to apply. But if she qualified under the Federal Skilled Worker class, then no, she wouldn't get an invitation to apply, because right now, the last draw, they were only drawing for that. The reason why the points have dropped dramatically from 470s before COVID to the 437 is because they haven't been inviting people who qualified under the Federal Skilled Worker class. And also, perhaps because a lot of people don't have their IELTS yet, because the IELTS testing centers and the self-help testing centers were closed. So as they are getting to be open, perhaps the points might inch up, but still I think during this time, it would be a good time for people to get the invitations to apply if you qualify. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what qualifies you. What gives you the points for express entry? Age. Age is a big defining point, okay? After your 30th birthday, it's no longer a happy birthday, okay? Because after your 30s, every time is your birthday, it drops by 5 to 6 points. After your 40s, it's fast slide down 10, 11 points. And then by the time it's 45th birthday, the good thing is your points don't go down for age anymore, okay? Of course, that's because it's 0 for your age points. Education, if you have 2 degrees or more, that gives you a big bump, okay? But one of those degrees have to be at least a 3-year degree. Language is very, very important. If you do not have work experience in Canada, normally to get the 470s, you're looking at least scores of 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening, okay, for your IELTS, okay? Canadian work experience that we just talked about under the Canadian Experience class, that's the work experience that counts, okay? That can be very important. Foreign work experience, if you have overseas high-skilled work experience, we can get some points for that, maybe, okay? Spouses, work experience, language points, education. So a lot of times if you're single, you might get more points than if you're married, unless your spouse is what I call a super spouse. If your spouse has a high level of education and language, and maybe some Canadian work experience, we may be able to get more points based on your spouse's background. Provincial nominee programs. Now, people often get this confused. They think if I get any sort of provincial nomination, then I get 600 points for express entry. That is not the case. You have to apply and get approval under one of the express entry provincial nominee programs in order to get the 600 points for this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that for Ontario. Previous study in Canada, if you've studied in U of T with a bachelor's or master's or PhD, you will get 30 points. Arranged employment. Now, people often think, oh, I have a job offer, I have arranged employment. No. If you are on a post-grad work permit, you will not get arranged employment points because they require either that you have an LMIA or that you have been working on an employer-specific work permit for at least 1 year and you have a permanent or at least 1.5 year job offer afterwards. So arranged employment do not make the mistake that you think that you will get arranged employment if you're on post-grad work permit. If you have siblings who are Canadian and permanent residents in Canada, you get a few points. And the ability to speak fluent French is super important if you have that. If you have that, then that will open up a lot of doors and you will get significant points for that under the system. Trade certification, that's a very specific trades. Normally we're looking at the construction trades or cooks and chefs. This is for people in the skilled trades area, okay? It's not just any profession that you can get the 50 points. Okay, so if you are in the pool, but it doesn't look like you're going to be invited anytime soon, maybe your points are a little bit lower, maybe you're in the federal skilled worker class and during COVID times they're not inviting you, okay? There may be a way for you to be able to get through based on the OINP express entry streams. So in order to qualify for this, OINP is the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. It's basically the Ontario government has been given permission, like every other province in Canada, to select their own people who they want to get permanent residence, okay? And so for Ontario, if you are already in the express entry pool, they may invite you then to apply with them for 600 more points. That's called an expression of interest, but you have to first be in the pool. So there are 3 categories where you may receive an expression of interest. The first one is the most ubiquitous one. It's called the human capital stream. And if you ask them, who do you want to be selected under the stream? And we've often asked the program managers this question, and they will say, well, we are not sure right now, okay? They have something called the tech draws, where they look at your background, and if you are, in one of the tech occupations, they may invite you to apply, depending on your express entry numbers, your CRS numbers. So they look at your occupation, and maybe if your numbers are high, but they're not high enough. So maybe, for example, they might say, oh, you have 435. Okay, you know what? You can't get through just by being in the pool, likely. But we are interested in you, so we'll invite you to apply. Okay. The other things that they have selected are people in certain other occupations. Which occupations are those? They don't state ahead of time, but they might say, oh, we need management consultants, and so they might invite you to apply if your score is at that level that is high enough. They have their own cutoff. It's not as high as the federal draws, but they still have their own cutoff as well. Or other times they've invited people who have job offers, okay? To qualify for this, you must have a bachelor's degree or higher. Skilled trades, if you were working in Canada in one of the specified trades, so not cooks or chefs, but one of the construction trades, bakers, etc., and you have 1 year of work experience in Ontario, they might invite you to apply. And then again, if you're speaking French. So if you can speak French fluently, we're looking at basically the same level of 6.0 in IELTS, that's the same level for French, okay, the equivalent in French. So if you have that, they may invite you as well to apply with them. Okay, so some of you might say, oh, hooray, I think I'm going to have a fantastic chance to get through express entry. And other people might say, oh, shoot, I don't know if I can get through this, okay? If you can't, or you're thinking, oh, I need to see some alternatives, here are some alternatives. We're looking again at another provincial nominee program, and this is an Ontario provincial nominee program. Essentially, we have some employer-based programs. So what employer-based programs are, they're not express entry, okay? We're completely separate from express entry. And in order to qualify, you first need a job offer from a qualified employer. If the employer is inside the GTA, they have a gross income of $1 million, have 5 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees in the location where you're at, and they have been in business for 3 years, then you can qualify. If they're outside of the GTA, they have to have a gross income of $500,000, have 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees, and be in business for 3 years. The job offer needs to be full-time and permanent. Okay, so that's the baseline. If you are an international student, okay, then you can apply if you apply within 2 years of your graduation, as long as the job is high skilled and meets entry wage for your salary, then you can qualify. Now, here's the thing about this program. It is a very, very good program, and it's maybe a little bit too good, because what's happened is it was so popular, they closed the program in May because too many people had applied last year. And this year they opened it again in February, but it was open and shut within minutes because so many people were applying, okay? They may or may not open up again this year. It depends on, and maybe it might be a little bit better next year because the points have been quite low for people who have job offers and qualify under the Canadian Experience class, okay? It's always this and the express entry. If the express entry points are really high, then this becomes really popular. If the express entry points are lower, then this is not as popular. Okay, so but this is something that's there for you guys. The other one is if you haven't graduated. So for example, your spouses, they haven't graduated from a Canadian program, but they have 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in the occupation, then they can also qualify, and the wage needs to meet median wage. And finally, this is one of the only lower skilled positions. So these are low skilled jobs, but they are in high demand. Farm workers, installers, construction, etc. If you have 9 months of work experience in Ontario in this occupation, then you can qualify. And this one is the only one right now that that is still open right now. Okay. Finally, just wanted to touch on the caregiver program. If any of you or your spouses, you have the work permit and you work for 24 months caring for someone in their home to care for the children, elderly or disabled person, you have 24 months of full-time work experience in Canada, and you have at least a 1-year post-secondary education credential from anywhere. The language benchmark is 5, okay? And then you can qualify under that, okay? So this may not be your dream career for those of you going to U of T, but perhaps looking at your spouses, they might qualify for this. They don't have to live in someone's home. They just have to go and care for them in their home, full-time, 8 hours a day. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the law and how to qualify. I'd like to look at some practical advice for you guys on the next steps. What should you do? The first thing you need to do is have a plan. In immigration, you have to have a plan. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? Okay, so if you like, we can sit down with you and have a consultation with you, and I'm going to put up a slide afterwards to show how to book a consultation with us. But you have to have a plan as to how to get there. Once you have a plan, you need to know that you're going to do what is on that plan. For example, you got to study and take your practice exams for the IELTS while you're, always make sure that the IELTS can be crucial. And oftentimes, even people whose first language is English can have difficulty with the language exams, okay? So make sure that you study for them. the programs that you need, right, for your post-grad work permit, right? Make sure you have enough time on your post-grad work permit, okay? Make sure you stay in status, okay? I put that first, because if you aren't in status, then everything can very fast melt away. So whatever, I know studying for your exams is priority, and finding a job is priority, but staying in status must be the first priority. If your application is rejected, you must contact a lawyer right away, okay? The federal court notice period is 15 days from the date of rejection. Right now the courts are closed, so the dates will start counting. The time that they're closed doesn't count, but when they're open, the days start counting. And if you miss that deadline, then you can basically miss out on your chance to have your decision on your application be reviewed by a judge, okay? Oftentimes people, if you get a decision and you're shocked by the decision as a wrong decision, you do what comes natural. You call the call center, okay? But you have to understand, immigration is not a department store. It's not like a service, a private service, okay? You pay for it and you should get proper service. You complain and etc. When you call the call center, the officers will record likely what you're telling them on your file. Okay, so first of all, be very careful what you're telling them as well. And second of all, they'll say, oh, okay, why don't you just write something in, okay? If you just write something in, oftentimes, you may not know exactly what to write, but you write something in and they reject your application, and then you go to a lawyer, okay? So people will say, oh, I wrote something in and that was rejected again. Now help me. What I'll say to them is this: since you've already written in, you would have already filed a reconsideration. If now you want me to put in a proper reconsideration for you, immigration is going to say, look, this person already had a reconsideration. We're only going to consider one reconsideration. So they may not even open my request, okay? So make sure that you go to a lawyer first before you start writing things to immigration, is what I'm trying to say. Because you only have one kick at the can, okay? Also, you may need to file a restoration of status if you're out of status. Even though you can make an application for postgrad within 180 days, you lose your status once your study permit expires or 90 days after you've finished your program. And so if your postgrad work permit is rejected after that period of time, you may need to file a restoration as well. Okay, so all of these things can become very complicated. Don't wait and think, oh, should I contact a lawyer? Just contact a lawyer, contact an expert, because at that point, your status is jeopardized. If you can't get the postgrad work permit, if you're out of status, you're going to be in big trouble, okay? So this is our contact information for our firm. If you like, do let us know, if you want to book a consultation, do let us know that you've attended this seminar. If you have, then we offer the discount for you for the consultation, okay? All right, Zia, we have time for a few questions. What do we have?
So we've gotten some great questions. The first one, Elizabeth, that I have for you is, if someone holds a postgrad work permit, can they go back to school? Can they study? What do they need to do?
Sure. You can go back to school. You can apply for a study permit, certainly. But the advice that I would have for you is know what your plan is before you do, okay? Because oftentimes, if you are going back to school, you will waste that time that you have on your postgrad work permit where you can gain work. Remember, to qualify for the Canadian Experience class and to get the points for express entry, you have to not be studying full time. So if you're studying full-time, that work experience that you're going to get is not going to count. Okay, so again, planning is very important. Don't just say, oh, I want to do my master's after my undergrad right away. If you're going to do that, don't apply for your postgrad right away. Okay, so yeah, so that's my answer. Plan, you can. Should you? We'll see.
Okay. Right, but you can hold both a study permit and the postgrad work permit at the same time.
Yes, you can, absolutely.
If I received my postgrad work permit and I did not receive the full duration of it because my passport was expiring early, can I apply to extend it to get the rest of it, and when should I be applying?
Yeah, you can absolutely apply to extend your work permit before. And really, normally we say apply for your work permit 4 to 5 months before it expires. But in this case, you do qualify for the full work permit. So even if you apply earlier than that, they might still give you the full length of your work permit as well.
If I'm doing my PhD program right now or my master's program, can I apply for permanent residence while I'm still studying?
If you qualify, yes, absolutely you can. And we actually do help a lot of PhD students, because especially PhD students, because your length of studying can be so long, 5 years, right? And as you know, age points go down, etc. You might as well, because a lot of times you might get more funding if you have permanent residence or you've applied. So certainly we can take a look at your situation and see if there are ways for us to get you the PR while you're studying.
You mentioned that for the postgrad work permit, we have a certain amount of days after we've completed our program. How do we know when that timeline starts?
Okay, so let's do this timeline. I am going to write my exams, okay? That's fine. I'm waiting for my dissertation. I'm not finished my program yet. At that period of time, I can work part-time if I'm a full-time student. And in the last semester, if I'm a part-time student, I can actually work full-time. Okay, and during COVID times, if I'm doing essential work, I can work full-time. In any case, I can work based on my study permit, student status, okay? Now, when I finish writing my exams, I haven't received a decision yet. Okay, I'm still a full-time student. But when I have received that notice, it could be online saying your grades are in, okay? And you look at your grades, oh, I completed everything. Or it could be a letter or email from the school, okay? The first indication that you've completed your studies, that day is when it starts. So once that I receive that, I cannot work based on my student status because I am no longer considered a student under immigration laws. If I am not going to complete another program within 150 days, so sometimes I'm completing my first program, but I'm going to start a new program, in the fall. I finished in April. I'm going to start a new program in the fall. Okay, that's fine. I can work during the summertime. But if I've completed my studies now in May, for example, and that's it. I'm not going to study anymore. Then once you've received that first indication that you completed your studies, then you have to stop working based on your student status. You say, well, I have a job. What can I do then? Okay, if you want to start working, apply for your postgrad work permit. Remember, 90 days or when your study permit is going to expire, you have to apply. If you apply at that time, then I can start working, okay, full-time, based on the fact that I've applied for the postgrad work permit. You say, well, I don't even have my letter from the school yet. You could submit your application even before you receive the letter, okay? It would be best if you had all your documents that qualifies you when you apply. That would be the best way to do it. But if you're desperate and you say, I need to start working and my school is closed and I can't get a hold of anyone, you can apply and then update your application afterwards as well.
So you're speaking specifically right now about COVID times, so that the measures that IRCC has put into place, because right now they're understanding that students may not be able to get the letters or transcripts.
Yeah, absolutely. So if, IRCC is being very understanding right now for documents that are missing in the application. The essential documents are the fees and the forms. If you don't put those in, it's not even considered that you've submitted the application. But if you put those in, you click that button to submit, you have submitted it, okay? Whether or not the officer is going to approve it, that's another matter, okay? But at least you've put it in, okay?
If I hold a study permit, I want to transfer programs. Let's say I'm moving from my master's to a PhD, but I haven't actually completed my master's, so I'm just changing into a different program. Do I need to be getting a new study permit? Do I need to be notifying IRCC?
Yeah, so you do have to notify IRCC that you are going to a new program, but you don't have to apply for a new study permit per se.
Okay. And you mentioned knock codes, you mentioned looking at high skilled. How do we determine what our knock code is?
It's online, it's all online knock codes, but oftentimes it's more of a art than a science. Not all occupations will fall directly and be pigeonholed directly into, a few hundred occupations that the government has described. But we do have to squeeze a square into a circle sometimes. And so what the officers do look at is the overall picture, the majority of the duties. Which one does it fit in the best? And oftentimes, during the consultation, we will look at your occupations and, make a determination as to which knock code would likely be the best for your situation. But oftentimes as well, even the letters that when you're applying for permanent residence or work permit, etc., the duties are very, very important, where the officer will consider the entire position as a whole and see whether or not which knock code that you've selected will fit in there.
Okay. Right now, IRCC, are they still processing PR applications?
They are processing PR applications. The officers are working from home. So, or a lot of them are working from home. So they may take a little bit longer than normal, but they are still processing applications.
Okay, that's great to hear. And on, for an open spousal work permit, how is that, if my spouse has an open spousal work permit, if my classes are affected or I have to take a break, how does that affect my spouse's work permit?
So for most spouses' work permit, you have to take a look at the remarks. For most spouses' work permit, it's valid until it's valid. Okay, so say my study permit ends in September 30th, their work permit would end on September 30th. Now, during that time, if I finish my studies in May, right? My status ends 90 days after that, okay? But their work permit will continue on until whatever it states. I have, however, seen some spousal work permits where in the remarks it says it's only valid when your spouse has student status. Okay, it's dependent on the student status. So then their status, so then you would have to extend their work permit when you are extending your study, you're maybe applying for your work permit as well. Because if their status is dependent on your status will end 90 days after you finish studying as well. Okay.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, perfect. So, so that's it for us. And we will be writing down on the chat box a link if you guys want to sign up for a newsletter, because it is changing all of the time. And I was doing some seminars for students for other groups just a month ago, and things have already changed already. So if you do want updates, we do send out immigration updates through a newsletter. And Zia, would you mind, or we'll put it on the chat box afterwards, and we'll be here to answer some more of your questions on Q&A as well. Okay, so that's it for us. Miriam, thank you so much for inviting us today and hosting.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for such a very good and informative session. I'm sure that all people have got a lot of their questions answered. So thank you very much for being here, and we will share your slides with our students after the meeting so that they have all the information that they need for PR application, study permit, and work permit.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.